You ready? Good afternoon, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the Marion City Council work session for Tuesday, August 1st. Before we begin, I want to say thank you, commend our staff for last weekend with the storm event. This being prepared for whatever might have happened. Thankfully, it wasn't catastrophic, but we were prepared and could have handled anything. I felt the way that we were anticipating, and I know that our staff was ready, and people were out there all night working and responding to the storm with whatever we needed. And I think we came through it just great, and residents were happy with how we responded. So thank you. Great job. Once again, you made us all good. So, okay. We will start with Leanne and the budget discussion. Always fun to have those budget discussions.
Good afternoon. This is the second in a series of budget discussions. At the last city council meeting, we discussed the financial policies that provide the framework within which we operate. Today, we'll discuss the 5-year financial plan or cash flow model, which will assist Team Marion understand the impacts of different decisions throughout the process. City Council has already seen a number of these financial models. Last spring, when we moved forward with the road use tax financing for the public service facility. In June, we moved forward with the solid waste and sanitary sewer, or we are currently moving forward with the solid waste and sanitary sewer financing. And Michael Maloney from DA Davidson presented those models back in June. And we also presented the urban forest model back in June as we increased the urban forest fee. So today's focus will primarily be on the general fund and stormwater fund. And I want to pause for just a moment to make sure I do recognize Michael Maloney from DA Davidson. He's not with us tonight, but he put in a lot of hours last week and ongoing as we pass reiterations of these models back and forth. The general fund includes several funds, including equipment reserve, tax stabilization, hotel, motel, and pension funds. I apologize in advance for jumping around within the model as I discussed today, but I'm going to approach this discussion similar to budget by starting with expenses. And you can follow along either in the models that I put in front of you or on the screen, or you can just listen. Past increases are driven by expanded service offerings and includes maintenance and utilities related to new infrastructure. For instance, new parks, trails, a new library building, and fire station. Marion's continued growth creates a challenge when trying to forecast increases. During fiscal year 22-23, no staff were added, and we began to evaluate positions as they became vacant. For instance, the HR director position and community development director positions were either not filled or have been reorganized into other different positions. Fiscal year 23-24 budget includes 6 new firefighters. And as we're looking towards the budget for fiscal year 24-25, we're not looking to add new positions unless they come with revenue to offset. Building a staffing plan could help inform these numbers as we look to the future. The current model assumes a 5% increase year over year in expenditures. However, items to be considered in fiscal year 24-25 and the coming years include implementation of the compensation study, the rollout of the bookmobile, maintenance of the CMAR trail, which we assume will be a positive since we're hard surfacing that trail, and operating or maintenance of the Central Plaza, among other capital project completion impacts. Looking at the transfers out, you can see a transfer out of hotel motel for a debt obligation related to the Lau Art Trail. Capital projects outlay the expenses that come out of the equipment reserve fund primarily for equipment replacements. And this is the area that is identified in projects in motion that we are working on right now to better inform those $1.5 million numbers you see in fiscal years 25 through 28. Looking at general fund revenues, you'll note the franchise fee increased into fiscal year 24-25, and then we left it flat as we don't have a good trend history. And as you know, it's largely driven by Iowa weather. Hotel motel tax is left at the existing 350,000 budget level. The proposed new Holiday Inn will increase this number, but we don't yet know the timing or by how much. The hotel motel policy will be a discussion as we get closer to the budget. Intergovernmental includes commercial backfill that is being phased out, so you see that trending down, and new business property tax reimbursement. We continue to review fines and fees and have already updated the fire department's schedule. Those impacts are not yet into the model. I know this is a lot of numbers. Looking at the transfers in, the special revenue reduction is due to the state backfill and the employee benefits portion of that. The tax increment financing fiscal year 24 includes a catch up as we looked at the airport expenses and reimbursing those with TIF. And the capital projects transfer is a return of derecho dollars into the equipment reserve fund that we're anticipating to be on the council agenda for approval next session. Any questions so far? House File 718 passed last session created different limitations based on valuation growth percentage. The calculation is different, whether you're in a range of 103 to 106% of your growth, or if you're greater than 106%. You'll notice a big breaking point at 3% growth to 5% growth. So 3% growth would indicate a change in tax or increase in property tax dollars of 786,000. An increase in 5% due to the limitation brings that number down to 456,000. We actually built the model with 2% growth as the most conservative. The reason being that if tax rates are forced down, that means the amount available for tax increment finance also decreases, which means we may need to use more valuation to meet those debt service obligations that are abated by TIF. And just another note is the state has indicated they are not done. Some bills proposed last session would reduce commercial rollback from 90% to 80%, which would have further implications. At the time of budget, the fiscal year 24 change in fund balance was around -2 million. Franchise fee increase is what has made that change down to 1.68 million. Note this includes all funds. That unrestricted cash balance includes that hotel motel fund. When I say all funds, I'm meaning all general funds. And the negative cash flow drop below the reserve occurs in fiscal year 26 and 27, which for those of you that prefer a more graphic. So our work continues to balance. We've already completed the franchise fee increase. As I already stated, we're currently reviewing the fines and fees, and we're doing an equipment reserve deep dive to determine what equipment needs to be replaced when it gets replaced. We are continuing our practice of zero-based budgeting. As I indicated, we are not planning to entertain new positions for fiscal year 25, and we'll continue to evaluate vacant positions. We are looking at the health insurance high deductible plan. However, just a quick note for council, that doesn't impact the general fund balance because we get to offset those with the employee benefits levy, which is unlimited. And then we are continuing to evaluate service delivery, for instance, the fire plan review process that Chief Fagan brought forward earlier this year, and then the purchasing card RFP that we're moving forward with right now. Any questions on general fund?
Go ahead.
Can you go back to the slide that talks about the impact of the decisions our brilliant legislatures made? So are you talking about, so this is based upon the 2% growth?
We used the 2% growth in the model. However, this is a scenario where we ran the numbers for what if Marion's taxable valuation grew by 2%? What if it grew by 3%? What if it grew by 5%? And we computed the applicable limitation, which I said the calculation you run or the limitation is different based on which category you fall into. And that breaking point seems to be 3% growth.
So based on what you're saying there, in the 5% growth column, with the new legislative rules, if we grow 5% instead of 3%, we actually go backwards.
You still increase the amount of tax received, but not nearly by as much.
Okay, so explain to me how we go from the 1,972,000,000 to 1,971,000,000. Is the difference there somehow the legislative rules that you got 2% more growth, but yet you got a smaller taxable value?
So the taxable value at the top on fiscal year 24, that 1.877, I've just multiplied that by 102% for 2%, 103% for 3%. So that's just the number in the value. As far as the bill, bill is structured in the sense that once you've hit 3% growth, anything above that 3% growth, we're going to ratchet down that general fund levy. So you'll notice we go from an 8.275 general fund levy, which includes the library levy and the civic center levy, down to $8.11.
Okay,
And their goal overall in the bill is to bring everyone's general fund levy down to 810, the way the bill is
so
written.
the 1971 is, okay, I'm still not understanding why that number is smaller than the 3% growth of 1972.
I may have done a typo.
Okay, so that number should be larger than the 3%.
Correct. It should be.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That's what I was trying to get at.
And I did have
That was-
multiple people look
That's
at
why
this.
I was trying to
So I'm
figure if
guessing
that's a
I-
legislative thing or what's causing that.
I'm guessing I typed it wrong.
All right, very good. But what you're saying is, once you get from the 3 to the 5% growth, the key is they start playing with our levy rate
Correct.
because we're at the 5% growth number.
Yes.
So we can grow, instead of 2%, we can grow 5%, but yet not gain a whole lot
Correct.
as a result of that.
You won't see as much growth in taxable. And thank you for pointing that out, Steve. I've had numerous people see this slide. You're the first one to point that out.
The 3% should be 1.933.
Okay, yeah, one of them needs changed. Okay, okay. All right, yeah, this is the first I've seen the impact of what the legislative session is trying to do. Are they talking about fine tuning that, making it better, making it worse? Do we have any idea yet what their direction may be going? Because they threw that out right at the end of their session.
And if I recall correctly, there's a 4-year sunset provision. So after 4 years, that would go away or they'd evaluate it. We do know that, as Leanne mentioned, that there is going to be a renewed effort to continue to look at property tax reform.
Yeah,
We continue to share this information, the presentations that Leanne puts together, the reports. We continue to share it with our contacts at the state, just so they're aware. What we've heard from the folks in Des Moines, the intent behind this House file was that communities would just capture as much of growth as they could and put it in the reserves. What it doesn't account for is the way Marion budgets, or how we've been budgeting these last couple of years with the zero-based budget. So we're effectively building from zero up and levying for what we need, not levying for what we can grab. Which I believe that there is this prevailing thought that other communities do that to build up their fund balance. But as you can see from what we do, that's not the Marion way. So what sorry, to add on, what we've been trying to communicate is this is how it should be done. This is a good fiscally responsible way to handle the taxpayer dollars, build from zero. You know, council does a great job of engaging with the community at the office hours. We do the community survey. We tie that community survey into our strategic plan. So we're making sure that we're funding the services and programs that our community is asking for, and we're levying based off of that.
But the challenge with what they're doing to cities that are growing like we have is you need to provide the proper services. We need to add the firefighters. And then to pay for that, they're not allowing for the top line to grow with that if we do have that sustained growth. So
Does
I think
put a challenge on us, yes.
yeah, I mean, this is a heck of a challenge. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously we know we can't be tapping out of our reserves, you know, year after year after year, and certainly not to these extent. So
And
a lot of work to be done.
And you know, there will be folks that will say, well, you know, it's just, you can cut here, but what the documents that are placed before you in the dais and that are, I believe, are included in the packet, right, Leanne? I mean, the different funds, the general fund, it's not as simple because we have certain departments that are funded out of different funding sources. So it's not all property taxes. So that's why these models are so important, so we can make sure that we are establishing the proper rates to pay for the proper services. But those services, those are core services. Our police officers and our firefighters are the ones that are getting funded out of the general fund. And if we're being capped, it's becoming more difficult to fund those vitally important services for our community.
Leanne, after you adjust that number, can you give us
Resend
a
it.
copy of that Thursday?
Yes,
I
and
think-
if you want, Steve, I can actually send you the Excel document that does the calculation.
All right, thanks.
No, you like to see the numbers. And I'd actually prefer someone check that because I actually shown my calculations to Michael Maloney and to Ted. We shared it with Ted.
Thank you.
On the stormwater side, looking at stormwater management operating expenses, you will recall that we did increase our staffing by hiring an environmental specialist in fiscal year 22 or 23. I don't have that one in front of me right. Our model right now just assumes an inflation factor on the expense side. So it's kind of built with status quo. On the operating revenue side, same deal with the exception of the fact that we did put in a modest increase across the bottom. The true impacts for stormwater management will come from the capital side. I'm just kind of showing the operating income, as you can see, appears to be negative, but when you add back the depreciation, the net revenues for debt are all positive and looking healthy. And then you can see in fiscal year 24 how we are adding debt service in and bond proceeds for the public service facility. This is, of course, contingent on the outstanding litigation that we have with our insurance carrier and coverage on the facility. And then you'll see that net change in fund balance is negative. The capital does also include a stormwater master plan, which will also inform our model as we move forward. With the assumptions built into the model at this time, you would see that reserve dipping below the preferred level in 26, 27. So on a quick summary on the stormwater management, the two big things that we kind of have outstanding to better inform the model are stormwater master planning and the public services facility financing, which we expect to occur in the winter. Any questions on the stormwater? That one's a little more straightforward. We have several models still in progress. I already mentioned was the asset replacement. We're also looking at building out a capital projects cash flow model. We've got tax increment financing almost complete and a debt service model to look at the debt service fund cash flow. And as I said, this is a series, so we will see you again in a couple weeks with the fiscal year 22-23 report and a strategic plan update. Thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. Okay, next is Mike Barcolo, Brick Streets.
Yes. All right, so we're gonna talk about brick streets. I know it's been on the agenda for a while, but we're gonna at least start the conversation today. Just wanna make everybody aware, we don't need any decisions today. If there's a direction of a path to move forward, but we can go back and forth. This is just to get the conversation started. There's no deadlines. We just wanna start the conversation. So our current strategic plan has goal 1.3, which is preserve the historic character of the city. And the current issue that we're dealing with is we currently have existing bricks that are difficult to maintain. And we want to formalize a short-term and long-term plan on how we move forward with those existing brick streets. And we'll get to where they're at here in a minute. But the background, again, we have limited existing exposed brick. We do actually have a lot of streets in Marion that are brick, but they're overlaid in HMA. The problem with that, to preserve them, is typically when you mill that, you're going to destroy the brick surface. It makes the bricks that they're not worth anything. Brick, 6th Avenue, mixed feelings on that. And then during the 7th Avenue project, we changed away from the uptown plan with the pound sign. And with this topic, it's kind of unlimited potential and options moving forward. So that's why we boiled it down. We had 3 at council subcommittee. We narrowed it down to 2 and take those 2, and then it can go any direction from there. But we want to start with something, otherwise it would be an endless discussion. So here's where we're at today. So the streets that are in purple are exposed brick streets. At least one of these city council drove as part of the pavement condition index criteria. And those are all rated as 0 because of the roughness of them. And then we have 2 that are in the teal or green color that were palletized as part of the 7th Avenue reconstruction project. So 10th Street and 9th Street between 6th and 7th have all been palletized and saved. So that's where we're at today. That's all we have left. That's actually exposed brick. So the 2 main options were Terrace Park, which is a historic area, and art or general other items. So go into a little detail on that. So Terrace Park, this is 11th Street north of 10th Avenue. We would reconstruct the existing streets that are brick out there. There's probably an assumption that you're going to lose about 50% of the brick just on them breaking when you're pulling them up or cutting and putting the bricks back down. You're going to lose some of those old clay bricks. But the idea here is you would then reconstruct 11th Street and or others as the brick stockpiles are large enough. And then just high level, to give you an idea, it costs about $400,000 for the 4 blocks above what a normal reconstruction would cost. So each block is about $100,000 more to put brick versus just reconstructed in PCC or Portland concrete. So there is that extra because you're building that concrete base, you're putting down a leveling pad, and then you're putting the bricks on top of that. So there is more cost, and then also the cost of palletizing them. We won't go into this sheet very detailed, but this is where we come up with that number, where we're just showing what it costs to that surcharge to stockpile them, palletize them, clean them, and then that surcharge then put them back into place. But we won't go into those details, just showing you a high level. The other option, a lot of these we actually got from the Uptown. Brooke gave a lot of these ideas, so you can see some of them are sculptures, some of them are banding, other components. So that seemed like a lot when we were at the council subcommittee. They kind of narrowed it down and said we kind of like these ideas where we're actually incorporating maybe with a new street reconstruction project that we do bands or crosswalks or incorporate it into projects. So just high level, again, what we did was we took an intersection and if it was just a typical ADA ramp situation, this intersection would cost $14,000 to rip out the existing pavement, put the new ramps down and seed the area back. If we put some brick bands, which are areas in here in between and on the outside, just to kind of add some banding. And then again, this is something that can be spread over a larger area than just one street that has brick on it. We're talking 25,000. Again, it does increase the cost, but it's something where we could do it in more areas versus just one street that's brick. So what we're looking to from city council is one or two ideas, maybe brainstorming from what we just had. We can then take those ideas to the HPC or Historic Preservation Committee to determine, how do we get the highest impact based on direction that city council gives. So if you say we're building brick streets, is 11th Street the right street? Or should it be some other street? What block is most important? Is it 2 blocks? Is it 3 blocks? Is it 4 blocks? And push that back on them. Also look at, are there grants available? So it's not all city funding, other options. And then basically once we get that information back from HPC, bring it back to city council for presentation and direction. And we can do that as many times as we need to refine this. But eventually the goal is to then create a policy and then for council then to adopt that policy. So it might be something where the policy states as we reconstruct existing brick streets, we palletize the bricks and then we have enough bricks, you do X, Y, Z. Whatever that XYZ is, but that way we have a policy moving forward. Because some of these, by the time we say we want to reconstruct bricks and go back to the 11th Street, there is some time that even though there's brick streets out there, we're going to pull it up and we're going to break them. So if we want 4 blocks back, we need to reconstruct some of those other streets to generate that brick to put it back down. So it's going to take time to generate that. So we may not be around by the time all that happens. So putting a policy into effect. So I'll open it up to city council. If you have questions, certain items you want to talk about more. And again, we're just trying to get this started and have a conversation about it.
Thanks for that, Mike. Can you tell us a couple things that I would like to know as we move forward with that? Because I totally agree with having a general conversation or a policy if we are to save bricks. Can you tell me how many bricks would go to each pallet? And then could you give us a cost estimate as to what it would be to palletize per pallet? So if we did develop a policy that says, okay, we're going to save the bricks. So we know, like in your presentation, you said it would be 25,000 to do the banding, but that's literally just to put the bricks in. We haven't incurred the cost of actually collecting the brick, cleaning them, palletizing them, storing them in that equation either. So I think it would be interesting for me to know at any street, at any time, in any location, this is what the cost is per pallet, and these are how many bricks to each pallet we can expect. Can we at least break that component down so that we could talk in the same language of saying this block would be 25 pallets? And again, too, I understand there may be a 50% margin of throwaway, I guess we'll call it. But I'm just trying to break that down into manageable numbers.
Sure. So generally, I don't know about pallet, but we'll talk about square yards. So a square yard, if it was just concrete to remove that on a city street that we're going to tear out, typically it's about $7 a square yard to just remove. Pavement's going to go to a landfill or be used for revetment somewhere. The numbers that we got on 7th Avenue and I believe on 10th Street when we did that project, it was around the $40 per square yard for brick. Because again, that's a hand method. It's not using a piece of equipment that you just bust it and load it into a truck. So by pallet, I don't have those numbers, but high level, that's kind of the difference between that's just for saving.
And thank you. And maybe to rephrase the question, if we could, it'd be, if we could talk in square yardage, maybe that would be the way to go, is to say how many square yards of surface area would each pallet hold? You know, would that be 2.5 square yards per pallet? You see where I'm trying to go with that?
Yeah. and so the
Because in my
pallet-
mind, I gotta be able to justify, you know, if it's gonna cost us $50,000 to just collect the brick, put it into the mode of storing it, you know, we know there's gonna be obviously additional costs for reinstalling it, but at least that gives us a number to work with. You know, we just had the budget numbers, so we gotta make sense of some of these things when it comes to, that's a huge change, $7 a yard to $40 a yard for removal. And that street on North 11th, that there's some serious terrain elevation changes in that. Is there any erosion underneath that? That's a soil issue, because just to bring that to grade before it can be repaved, I can't imagine the dump trucks of dirt that has to go back in there.
So let's pretend that street isn't a brick street. If it was just a normal street that we were gonna reconstruct. What we would do with that street is we're gonna actually completely remove the street. We're gonna install drain tile or storm sewer on one or both sides, depending on what we need for storm sewer. We're gonna look at sanitary sewer. So typically the sanitary sewer is down the middle of the street. So if it's something that we can't slip line, we actually need to replace the sewer because it's going bad. We want to fix that before we pave a new street on top of it. So after we do all the utilities, then what we do is we actually scarify a foot below where the bottom of the rock is going to be. And we put 1.5 foot of rock and geogrid under that street.
Okay.
So I don't know if that comes into play too much. It's more, again, you're building a thicker cross section because you're building that concrete base, that leveling core and the brick. I don't know if the rest of it really comes into play, because again, maybe 11th Street isn't the right street. Maybe it's 12th
Right.
Street or an
And I-
avenue. So
And
I wouldn't focus on that particular street. Just how do you envision the bricks being used more so?
yeah, understood. Yep. And I appreciate that. That's, makes good sense.
Anyone else? Questions, thoughts about this? Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of comments when we were talking about this in subcommittee. One is, I think obviously looking forward, there's always some concern about how much extra money do you spend on a brick street. So at least my comments were, if we can take this brick, and that's why the art aspect came up, and that could be used at an intersection. They talked about, it could be, maybe you got a strip of that going down the middle of the road, you know, something like that. There's a number of different ways to reutilize that rather than doing the entire road like Sixth Avenue is out here. And to me, trying to do it in a manner that stretches it out in a bigger area that makes it show off an area, a larger area in some fashion, made more sense. I mean, the $100,000 extra per block, I can only justify so many blocks at $100,000 extra. And I know some of that expenditure, we're not talking about, right, a lot of that may not be in the next, I think some of your discussion may not be in the next couple of years. Some of that may be, you know, 10 or 15 years down the road, depending on what streets that is used for or how it's used. So some of this expenditure is not like right around the corner, but it's a matter of how do you want to use this brick? If you save it, that's the first question. Do you want to save it? If you want to save it, then how do you want to use it? So, I mean, again, the aspect of saving it, I like. The aspect of stretching it out over a larger area, I like, but, you know, I'm not sure if you were to do just one solid road or 2 blocks, you know, that's a lot tougher for me to justify giving $100,000 more per block. So
Unless we get grants.
yes, I agree with that. No, I'm not sure I agree with that.
With that?
I said, even if we get grants, I'm not sure I would still want to do, you know, an entire block, because you're only going to be able to do couple of blocks. How many blocks can you do? And can you do more by stretching it out in different art patterns or something like that? I mean, so I think you're still limited as to how much brick you're gonna be able to recover.
Yeah.
Some of that. Grants, I support getting all the grants you can.
Yeah, grants are great. I fall on the side of, I would still personally like to see bricks utilized in like an infrastructure aspect, like some of the examples like the bands or in crosswalks or as Steve pointed out, in the middle of the road. I'm not as much of a fan of the art pieces. I think having it still be part of the infrastructure in some way takes that historic aspect that people love about Marion, but it's still giving it purpose and use rather than just, oh, this thing is here to look at. So that's kind of where I fall, but I agree. I don't think it necessarily makes the most sense to spend that much for a small amount of blocks when you can expand kind of the impact that those bricks can have throughout a larger area. So that's kind of where I fall.
So let me clarify, when I was talking about art, I think Mike's presentation was using that, not necessarily in art like that. I don't necessarily support that kind of art.
Okay.
But using in the crosswalks, some patterns down the street, I was calling that kind of the enhancements to the roads, like the bottom right-hand picture and a couple he showed like that. So I was calling that kind of an art look,
Sure.
not necessarily a sculpture type art.
Cool.
So
Then
yeah,
I'm on the same page.
I want to clarify that definition, so.
Fair enough.
I think one street of 4 blocks in the middle of town just looks odd. Like if it was different, if it was a historic street or whatever, but it's just like, oh, we decided to use them here. I don't, so I agree with my colleagues. And where you use them, I'm not opposed to the art. I kind of like it. In a unique piece of where we have something in the community. So only because I like I like them along the pavers and that looks great. I don't know that people are going to connect. This used to be the brick streets and now we're putting them here. They're just gonna think we lined that entry piece and it looks nice, which is great. I like that too. So I could, either way, I kind of like I don't like the chair, but I like the other pieces of it as kind of a unique part with the recognition that these are where these bricks came from and preserving it. So I could go either way on that.
I would just add, sorry, if I may. I think that there's like, if we were to implement the bricks throughout some of those things so that people recognize, I think there's some like historic signage opportunities similar to what we're doing with the train pocket park and explaining train history. I think that there's some opportunities throughout. We're talking about signage stuff in Uptown. I wonder if there's some like historic markers that we can have that kind of explain that these bricks were here and in these historic neighborhoods in Marion, stuff like that. So at least that people know.
Well,
Just to comment on what you said, Sarah, about 11th Street is kind of the bricks kind of in nowhere, but that's the historic district. That's why it'd be good to keep them there, is because that is the district. Question for you, Mike. With 11th, well, with all the brick streets for that matter, I'm sure all of them are a 0 on your scale, every single one of them.
they are.
So where are they in the list of how soon they're gonna get replaced?
So basically, because this decision has not been made and we didn't know what we were doing with the brick streets, we postponed that.
They're all.
So we've actually started doing some survey on some of the streets, but we stopped it because we need to have this discussion first to figure out what we're doing with them.
Sure.
Before we move forward. So it could be something where we start incorporating it into the capital improvement program for the street network, where we come in and say we do a section of 13th Street, we reconstruct that, put it back. I'm just throwing that out. I don't know which one's the highest priority, but maybe we pick one. We start stockpiling the brick so that we can, whatever it is that we're gonna do with them eventually, but we need to have that decision that we are going to save them. So that we know how we're moving forward, and that's why we wanted that policy before we move any farther. So basically, we've taken the list of these streets that are still out there today and just put them aside. So when Jake runs his program that tells him which streets he should reconstruct, he can manually do some manipulation and just basically throw those aside for a future conversation.
How far out do you have it planned for complete reconstruction rates? So do you have the next
So
2
he
years already
reruns the
planned?
model. We get new numbers every 2 years. And so he reruns the model. But just because it says, hey, reconstruct this street, for example, if it has two major north-south streets, one of them's gonna need to get delayed so that we can still move traffic.
Sure,
So just because
So-
the model says to do it, we have to take some engineering logic into it.
I understand. But my question, I guess, is, so like Third is getting done right now.
Mhm.
Well, next one, do you have the next one already
I
planned?
believe Fifth Avenue might be the.
So there's
next one.
already,
Yeah, so.
at
I mean,
least
we have,
one
we
year.
have them in the queue. Doesn't mean that we can't come and insert one somewhere.
so and I think everyone knows, I'm in favor of keeping as many brick streets as we can and repurposing the bricks as much as we can in the streets because it is a historic district and because once they're gone, they're gone. We can't bring back the old brick and have them in the streets anymore. And I really, in my opinion, I think that doing it on 11th is important because it is the old historic district and that would hopefully help, with the homeowners in the area and the neighborhood to work on bringing back the homes in the neighborhood to bring the historic aspect of that area back to what it was. And you talked about you could make signage for the art pieces and whatnot. You could do that along that street too and talk about the history of that street. Unfortunately, we can't do it on Pucker Street anymore because that's all, well, I guess most of it's probably no brick underneath anymore, I would assume. Because you just
No, so,
redid it,
so
most of
for
it.
council's awareness, one of the third options that was presented to the council subcommittee was actually taking Pucker Street, which is actually our first concrete street in the city, and taking it back to brick. The problem with that is, and why it was kind of pushed away was, we just got done doing major work on that street, and so that would be, 30, 40 years before we'd even want to touch that, because we just spent that money to fix the street, so.
And those are our two historic districts, Terrace Hill, right? Terrace Hill? I can never remember. I know it's Terrace something. Terrace
Terrace
Park.
Park.
Thank you. And then Pucker Street. So if we could preserve here as much as we can, I think it would be good for, historic preservation. And that's something I thought of, and I don't remember if I talked about it in the subcommittee meeting or not, but it'd be good to find out what the neighborhood would like too, because they may not want brick streets anymore. And then those could be used as crosswalks or whatnot in other areas, but
Yeah, and that can be part of the process. If we wanted to say, take all the streets that have brick now and send a mailer out to all of those residents, we could and say, what's your opinion? Give them certain options. There's that option too. Get
The-
public input on it.
Historic Preservation Committee could work on that too. Find out what the neighborhood thinks. And I mean, I like the idea of some crosswalks and whatnot with the historic bricks, but I don't like the idea of taking those bricks and putting them on the east end of town at a crosswalk. They should stay, in my opinion, should stay in the historic area of the city.
And that can be part of it too, as the policy, you draw a certain boundary, and whether that's the historic
Where you
boundary
can
or
use them.
a certain boundary that's drawn
Yeah.
and say only in this area.
And that's really, I mean, if we're asking council for anything, it's that feedback that we can then take that, okay, Historic Preservation Commission, this is kind of your assignment that, right? So identify those historic areas within which those bricks should be redeployed. Work on a survey, perhaps you work on the survey first, as you said, suggested Councilman. Send it out to the neighborhoods, find out what they're saying, and then have that information drive the next step. But that's the purpose of the boards and commissions that we have, is they're kind of the work groups, they're the advisory boards and commissions to the council. So we kind of give them that charge. So staff has done, we've spent a lot of time putting this together, and we went through that subcommittee process to try to narrow it down so we can prime it for for today's discussion, but really ultimately what we want to do is get this off center and really come up with a policy that helps us understand kind of what our marching orders are to make sure that we're fulfilling the desires of the community and the council.
I think it should be a priority because those roads are the worst in town. And it's been, I mean, I've been up here for 8 years and the whole entire time I've had people commenting that live over there that,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
they
we
are.
need to do something with them.
Um,
So, anyway.
I just want to say thank you for spending all the time on it. And I'm thrilled that we're even having a discussion about it. You know, 5 years ago, we wouldn't even thought about having a discussion about what we should do up big streets. It was a foregone conclusion that we're just going to pave over them. So thank you. I really appreciate that we've made it a priority and that we're actually being more thoughtful about it. I just want to do whatever makes sense. I mean, you know, it may not make sense to redo an entire street. Whatever we do, I think, needs to be done like, you know, so it's very recognizable, you know. I agree that if we're gonna do crosswalks, it shouldn't be, you know, in some other part of town. You know, if it makes sense to do crosswalks and enhancements on corners or whatever in a district, then everyone knows this district, all the brickwork is, you know, is from the former streets of the city. So that's, it's just a very recognizable thing. If you want to do art, maybe you put them in the roundabouts. So everybody knows all the art in the roundabouts is former bricks from the former streets. Whatever we do, something like that, so it's easily explainable, recognizable, and you know, everyone knows, and it draws attention that, hey, these bricks came from the streets, and anywhere you go in the roundabouts, if there's art, that's, you know, that's from the streets. Or if you're in this district, all the brick in the street is in the pavement is from the streets. So, and whatever makes sense, obviously financially, and you know, I'm a practical person. I know, you know, everybody knows I'm passionate about saving the history, and I fought hard for 10th Street. To me, that would have been the obvious one to save, but you know, I'm glad that we're here at this point of even talking about this. And I'm sure that we'll all, working together, will come up with something that makes sense and that's, that adds value to what we're doing here. So thank you.
Mayor, council,
Yeah.
is it acceptable to you that we take this to the HPC commission and get them starting to develop a work plan around this topic?
Anyone object to that?
Good idea.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mayor, can I ask one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mike, on these here, bringing those to the surface and going through our winters, do you have an opinion as to what their lifespan would be if we went through the expense of hypothetically just putting them into a road, you know, with our brutal winters with salt, sand and the ice and the snow removal and so forth? What's the longevity of a traditional road that would be plowed annually, you know, like a normal street? I mean, we're already talking about bricks that are 100 years old to begin with. Any idea what the lifespan would be?
I mean, typically when we design a road, it's for 50 years, but a lot of times we use it way past its life. I can tell you that these bricks compared to the bricks that we put on Sixth Avenue, we can see a big difference between what was built today versus, you know, kind of that old mentality. They don't build it like they used to. You know, a lot of times you can flip them so that side that the snow plows hit and chipped, that side could go down. The other side that's right now is down could go up. Structurally, obviously, I wouldn't want to put it on a major road. That's, you know, don't put it on the interstate where you're going to have huge loads. Putting it on a local street is going to be better for it. It's going to last longer on a local street where it's just going to be cars versus heavy deliveries.
Sure. And I was just, thank you. And I was just kind of curious if we, you know, could potentially see a 20 or 30-year lifespan yet on those bricks. If,
Yeah,
And
the
again,
good thing
too-
is with building the concrete base, I mean,
right.
it
And
doesn't
that-
look like they're going anywhere. so.
Right. Yep. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Good question. Anything else? Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Appreciate all your work. Okay, next is the agenda review. first item marked for discussion is A9 on the second page. Any item prior to A9 that anyone has questions on? Yes, sir.
Sorry, I don't, I just want to flag A7 and A8 for the council. Those two items together represent $1 million in grant revenue being brought in by Team Marion. So I think that's an important thing to highlight for the community. Great job by Team Marion.
Thank you. Okay, then we'll go on to A9. Lucas.
Good evening. So recently we had a vacancy in our building division within community development. It was a permit technician position. And so when any new position comes up, we do an assessment on what are our options when addressing a backfill. So when we take a look at Team Marion Goal 6.1, that's listed up there. When we take a look at that, the engagement survey that we did in August 2022, an area of opportunity that was on the engagement survey report was, I see a path to advance my career in our organization. And then lastly, when we incorporate those two items with the community development department assessment, we wanted to move forward with developing a permit clerk position. And so when we talk about a permit clerk position, currently we hold 2 permit technician 1 jobs. The permit clerk would be more of that entry level. And so you see up on the screen kind of what that career progression would look like, or that career path. And so candidates or employees would start out as that permit clerk, and then during their time as permit clerk, they can work to get the required certifications it takes in order to be a permit tech 1. And then likewise, a permit tech 1 can get even more certifications to then advance to that permit tech 2. The permit tech 2 position is a long-term goal, but I wanted to display the bigger picture of kind of what our mission is. And so by having or creating the permit clerk, that entry level position, it'll open up the candidate pool so we could have more of that selection. But then also we can invest in that employee and by helping them get those certifications to then promote to permit tech 1. One thing with this, I want to make 2 important notes. Our goal is to always have 2 permit people, employees at the counter to help with our customer service levels. And then 2, there'll be no budget impact to creating this position. So the idea behind the permit clerk position is we will still budget as a permit tech 1. So then that way, when the permit clerk gets those certifications that they need in order to advance the permit tech 1, they can just assume that role, be promoted into that role. When I talk about promotion, that kind of plays into next steps where Baker Tilly will be, or they currently are, reviewing our pay policies, which would also include our promotional practices as well. In our current handbook, there's nothing related to promotional practices right now. Essentially, we have to post a position whether or not we're going to backfill. It's convoluted. I won't bore you with the details, but part of the next steps will be Baker Tilly reviewing those promotional practices. And then, as I mentioned before, with the engagement survey and the Team Marion goals, for any new vacancies, we're going to continue to assess any opportunities to build in leveling to help with that career path for employees, whether they're already internal or if they're new hires coming on board. Are there any questions?
Okay.
Very cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucas. Next item that's marked for discussion is under engineering E10. Prior to that, any items that need discussion? E10, Mike?
Yes, Your Honor. So those that are not aware, we have done 4 applications to the RAISE grant. So it used to be Taggold and now it's RAISE. We have been notified that we were not a applicant or a grantor of money for the money that we requested for that. We have requested a debriefing to find out what we need to do for that next application. In the interim, we have met with our metro communities and as a group, decided that we should go after this multimodal discretionary grant opportunity that's out there. We would be asking for 44.6 million, and this is everything from I-380 to 13 that's not currently obligated. So as you know, the DDI has recently been opened, the interchange, Diversion Diamond Interchange. The segment of C to Albernet is currently being graded and the utilities are being put in. This winter, we'll bid those packages and get the paving in for that section. And then there's some small sections that we will do east of Cornhenge through developers, to put portions of that in. So this would fill those gaps. City of Marion has 1 bridge over Indian Creek that we need to build between Old Winslow and New Winslow. And then the other municipalities have 2, one over the railroad and one over Dry Creek. So those bridges are not cheap. So we're looking at a different source of money. 70% of the money that went to raise grants this year were to areas of persistent poverty and historically disadvantaged communities. So not knowing yet, because we haven't had our meeting, but if 70% of the pot goes to those communities, that means only 30% of the pot is left for us because we're not going to meet those criteria. So we're trying to look at other alternatives to what we can do. This does not mean that we don't still apply for raise after we have our debrief, but this is just another application, another trial. It's going to cost $12,000 split among municipalities to put this application together so they can take our existing application that we use for raise, modify it, and then put it together for this. That's why it's fairly inexpensive. It is due on August 18th, so it's a very quick turnaround. That's why we're doing this, to get the resolution of support so we can put that in the application packet. And then we'll get a letter for the mayor and we'll get a template put together so we can get letters of support. And then this one, we will find out the award notices are in early winter 23-24. So we are recommending that we, again, move forward. Tower Terrace is an important east-west arterial to get that in there. And we're looking at any available grants to try and get that completed. So this is just another stab at it to see if this is a different alternative that maybe is a better fit than maybe raise is based on the current administration.
I don't know why you wouldn't apply it with such a minimal expense to us. Have we applied 3 times for a raise?
4 times.
4 times, okay. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Is the review group for this the same as the other grant, or is it a different group? Do we know?
I don't know that we know that.
And has our congressional delegation given us any advice on this, or?
I believe that's where we got the notice of funding opportunity. Obviously, we'll work with our legislators and get letters of support. One thing to note is this, I believe, has 3 separate buckets into it. You apply and then, but it's for 3 separate groups. We're only applying for one of them. The Iowa Department of Transportation, Wright Boulevards, is also applying for this, but it's a separate bucket, but it's the same application. So we may not get a letter of support from the DOT on this.
They're applying for Wright Brothers Boulevard. Is that what you said?
Yep. But it's just an odd way that they have it set up, that it's, I believe it's 3 buckets, but it's one application. So we're applying for different money, but it's the same application. But we have had conversations with the DOT. So they are aware. We just may not get a letter from them of recommendation.
Okay. Any other questions on this? All right. Next item is F3. Any item prior to F3 that Anyone wants to discuss? Okay, Kesha?
Good afternoon, Mayor City Council. Just want to give a brief update, moving forward with the Uptown Parking Study. So much anticipated. Just a recap, in May, staff sent out requests for proposals. In June, we received 6. We interviewed 3 consulting companies, and the selection committee unanimously recommended one going forward, HKGI, which you'll see on the screen. We had budgeted $200,000 for this, and we have come in at 113, a not to exceed number of 113,500. So with that, so project schedule, what we're looking at for this is kicking off in August with staff meetings. So obviously staff, how do we maintain parking? What are our comfort levels, type of thing? What are some things that we see internally? With that, they would continue with parking counts in September. So when school's resumed and you don't have large events, so they're just looking at kind of your average usage there. We'd also have public interviews or public input, which would consist of, I don't know if they're all listed out in here, but it's individual interviews, listening sessions with large groups, staff work sessions, open house, council presentation. So there's a number of touch bases along the way with this, and those are also identified in there, depending on whether it's a city staff work session in the circles, and then the listening sessions with the numbers with those. So there's 3 listening sessions that we anticipate going forward, and this has an end date in March of 24, and so kind of a 6-month plan. And so things that we're going to think about, talk about, discuss. This isn't a be-all end-all list. Many more can be included. EV parking, loading zones, parking management strategies, enforcement, wayfinding. We noticed that a lot of the consultants included a wayfinding package, so parking and wayfinding go hand in hand. We already have that underway, but that is a coordinated effort once we get into the discussions with parking to make sure that their HKGI is working with RDG to bring that forward to work cohesively. And another thing I will note with this one, with HKGI, they have a parking analysis model that we will be able to use even going forward. They kind of hand it over to us, and we can, my understanding is a simpler model, but nonetheless, it's something that we can use going forward. Any questions of staff?
Yeah, Kesha, can you remind us what the geographical region will be covering when they do this study? I mean, east, west, north, south, I mean, what kind of a space are they gonna be doing, or has that been defined yet?
Typically kind of 8th to 5th, 7th to 7th. I mean, we are just looking in the uptown.
8th to 5th, 7th to,
So roundabout to roundabout.
all the way down to 20
I'm trying to think if it goes that far.
parking study?
I know it goes from the Country Kitchen roundabout to, I thought it was like 15th, 16th, 17th Street in
Okay.
there. Cause I think that's where we run out of on-street, that's when the on-street parking starts to fall off on the 7th Avenue project. And then it's like, is it both sides of 8th Avenue to 5th Avenue? Cause we're trying to capture the school and their impact
Okay.
on the uptown.
Okay, thanks.
I think the only other thing to add is the group, the Uptown board that we'll work with. So we'll have, as far as a committee to also have inputs, we'll have staff input, and we'll include the chamber in that along.
The
with-
Uptown Board of Advisors, ideally, would be our biggest sounding board for some of those listening sessions, taking that group that's already established in Uptown and kind of getting feedback on that.
And then will we get to interact with them, with the, as a council?
I think it was the intent to have council members in on the listening sessions So it's not just the Uptown Board of Advisors, but that's kind of our base because of the active, the way that they're involved in the Uptown already. And then have council members be part of those to understand what's being said along the way.
Mayor, sorry, I just looked it up. It is from the roundabout at Country Kitchen to essentially 16th Street. So it'd be one block east of the roundabout here. And then it would be both sides of 8th Avenue, north sides of 5th Avenue.
Okay. That's good. Any other questions? Thank you. Next item that's marked for discussion is under the regular agenda E1. Anything prior to that item? Okay, Kara?
Thank you. This is just a really brief touch base on that ordinance I talked about last week relating to the basin agreements. In your packets last week, we attached the incorrect version of the updates. It was a red line version originally, and there was a comment for a change. In our previous, or the current way that we do it right now, where the basins are all dedicated to the city, we have the authority of the city engineer to deviate and have them remain private. However, when we flip that around, if we're going to deviate and accept a public basin, that requires council approval. So all we left off was that we need council approval to accept something if it's going to become a public basin. So it's a minor change, clerical issue. So, and also for code compliance reasons, we have to make that change.
Okay, makes sense. Okay. Then there are 3 unmarked items under community development. Any questions on those? Okay. This brings us, yes.
If, sorry, really quick, just for those that watch later or listening at home, so F2 and F3, that was presented at the last council meeting. We had planned on having that at the request of the petitioner due to travel challenges. They asked that it be tabled. So that will be, the petitioner will be here on Thursday for the council.
Okay. That brings us to the closed session.
Mayor, I move to adjourn to closed session regarding personnel matters as permitted under section 21.51I of the Code of Iowa.
Second?
Been moved and seconded to adjourn closed session regarding personnel matters as permitted under the Code of Iowa. May we have the legal counsel's statement, please?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have reviewed the proposed subject matter for the closed session and find the same to be appropriate under Iowa Code, section 21.51I.
Okay, any discussion before we vote? Roll call, please.
Mr. Miskman,
Yes.
Mr. Jensen,
Yes.
Mayor Abalosely,
Yes.
Mr. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Menzer,
Yes?
Mr. Sternad.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We're adjourned to closed session.